In the vast, silent expanse of Joshua Tree, some secrets are not buried in the sand, but blaze in the night sky. For Park Ranger Ben Carter, a man of logic and reason, the local legends of strange lights were nothing more than desert folklore, until he filmed them. Now, an impossible encounter has left a psychic imprint on his soul, tethering him to an indifferent, cosmic intelligence. As his reality fractures and time itself unravels, Ben must seek a desperate salvation in the desert's deepest silence before the light he captured erases the man he used to be. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The Park Service truck groaned as it chewed up the dirt road, spitting a plume of ochre dust into the rearview mirror. Ben Carter gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, a familiar tension settling in his shoulders. It wasn't the rattling chassis or the punishing Mojave sun that bothered him. It was the passenger seat. Chloe Vance was vibrating with an energy that felt alien in the profound stillness of Joshua Tree National Park. So, just over this ridge, according to my maps, is where our family in '97 saw them, she said, her voice a sharp, eager sound against the engine's rumble. They said it looked like liquid lightning dancing between the boulders. Liquid lightning, Ben repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Also known as a static discharge during a low humidity evening. Or ball lightning, which is rare but explainable. Or, most likely, teenagers with high-powered flashlights and a case of beer. He was a man built of geology and fact. At 38, he had traded a cramped city apartment and a life of predictable noise for the desert's quiet logic. He loved the park for its brutal honesty. A rock was a rock. A scorpion was a scorpion. Every effect had a cause you could trace, touch, and understand. He'd agreed to help Chloe's small documentary crew, Cosmic Chronicles, as a professional courtesy, a way to put a final scientific nail in the coffin of local ghost stories for the public record. Chloe sighed, a theatrical puff of air. Ben, you're a professional debunker. I get it, but you have to admit the sheer volume of sightings in this specific area is an anomaly. The volume of sightings correlates directly with the proximity of Highway 62 and the Marine Corps Air-Ground Combat Center at 29 Palms, he countered, gesturing vaguely to the east. Headlights on the interstate can bounce off atmospheric layers, a phenomenon called a temperature inversion. It makes light seem to float, to dart around. The military tests experimental aircraft and drops flares. You want mystery? There it is. Solved. His certainty was a shield, polished over years of dealing with tourists who saw UFOs and weather balloons and spirits in the rustling of a creosote bush. Chloe, however, was undeterred. She was in her late 20s, her ambition a palpable force. This documentary was her ticket out of low-budget web series and into something real. She needed more than Ben's dry explanations. Their first stop was a roadside diner just outside the park, a place where the coffee was burnt and the walls were covered in sun-bleached photos of alleged UFOs. They were there to interview a man named Coyote Jim, a local institution with a leather-tan face and eyes that held the wild, unfocused glint of a true believer. "They're not ships," Jim rasped, leaning into Chloe's microphone as the camera rolled. His voice was gravelly, cured by decades of unfiltered cigarettes and desert air. "They're not alive. Sky serpents, some of the old-timers call them. Spirit lights. They don't come when it's cloudy. They need a clean window. And they're drawn to the quartz, to the ancient rocks. They're singing the song of the earth, you see?" Ben stood just off camera, arms crossed, a patient, almost pained smile on his face. When Chloe turned the camera to him for a rebuttal, he stepped forward smoothly. What Jim is describing is fascinating folklore. The idea of lights being drawn to quartz is a common New Age belief, but it has no basis in physics. The clean window he mentions is simply a clear night sky, which is the only time you'd be able to see faint, distant light sources like military flares or refracted headlights for miles. The song of the earth is a beautiful metaphor, but what people are likely hearing is low-frequency sound from distant military exercises, or even just the wind playing tricks on the rock formations. He was good. He was logical, reassuring, and utterly convincing. Chloe could see the mystery segment of her film deflating before her eyes. She thanked a visibly crestfallen Coyote Jim, and they headed back into the park as the sun began its slow, fiery descent. That was clinical, Chloe said, breaking a long silence as they drove deeper into the surreal landscape of jarred Joshua trees and monolithic rock piles. It was the truth, Ben said, simply. I need more than the truth, Ben. I need a story. She pulled out a tattered, laminated map covered in handwritten notes in red circles. It was a compilation of witness sightings going back 50 years. Look, all these debunked sightings you talk about, they're scattered all over, but there's a cluster, one tight, undeniable cluster right here. Her finger tapped a spot deep in the backcountry of the park. The name, scrawled in faded ink, read, The Watcher's Bowl. Ben glanced at the map. He knew the area. It was a natural amphitheater of granite monoliths, remote and difficult to access. It was also profoundly, unnervingly silent. There's nothing out there, he said in his flat voice. No roads, no bases, no reason for any lights. Exactly. Chloe's eyes lit up. If we see something there, you can't explain it away. It's the perfect test. Let's set up the cameras there. For one night, we film whatever happens, even if it's nothing. At least then, the debunking will have some weight. We went to the heart of the mystery and proved it was empty. He hated the idea. It was a waste of time, a trek into the wilderness on a fool's errand. But he saw the plea in her eyes, the desperate need for this one last shot. And a part of him, the stubborn, scientific part, was pricked by the challenge. Going to the most notorious spot and capturing hours of beautiful, empty, star-filled sky would be the ultimate proof. It would be his final word on the matter. Fine, he sighed, the sound lost in the vastness. One night, we pack in, we pack out. But when we get nothing but footage of cactus and constellations, you owe me a steak dinner. Deal, Chloe grinned, her victory shining as brightly as the first stars beginning to puncture the deepening twilight. But if we see something, you're buying. Ben just shook his head and steered the truck toward the turnoff, heading for the place the old maps called the Watcher's Bowl. He felt a strange, uncharacteristic prickle of unease, a feeling he quickly dismissed as irritation. It was just a place, just rocks and sand and silence. The silence of the Watcher's Bowl was not an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was a heavy, ancient blanket woven from the chill of the high desert air, the weight of the star-dusted sky, and the immense geological patience of the granite monoliths that cupped them in a colossal hand. Ben, Chloe, and her two-man crew, a lanky cameraman named Leo and a quiet sound guy named Marcus, had been set up for hours. 3 high-definition cameras on tripods formed a triangle, their small red recording lights the only pinpricks of artificiality in the primordial darkness. Ben felt a familiar sense of vindication settling over him. It was 1:30 a.m. The air was thin and cold. The only lights they'd seen were the predictable silver streaks of satellites on their orbital paths and the distant, silent blink of a commercial airliner miles overhead. He had passed the time pointing out constellations to the crew, explaining the mechanics of the cosmos with a calm, paternal authority. Chloe was wrapped in a parka, her initial excitement having cooled with the temperature. She sat on a rock, nursing a thermos of coffee, her face illuminated by the glow of a monitor displaying 3 feeds of static. Beautiful nothing. Disappointment was written in the slump of her shoulders. Maybe another 20 minutes, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Then we can call it. Marcus was asleep, his head resting against a gear case. Leo was methodically cleaning a lens, his movements slow and bored. Ben allowed himself a small internal smile. It was exactly as he'd predicted. The desert's greatest mystery was its own profound emptiness. He took a deep breath of the crisp, clean air and looked straight up, into the heart of the Milky Way. A shimmering river of light spilled across the black velvet of space. That's when it happened. It didn't appear like a flare or a plane. It didn't streak across the sky. It simply coalesced. In the empty space between the constellations, a light began to pour into existence. It was not a single point, but a silent, fluid bloom of soft, impossible colors. Pale, ethereal greens swirled with deep, royal violets and soft, electric blues, like oil on water, but the water was the fabric of space itself. It was utterly silent. For a moment, everyone was frozen, mind struggling to categorize the input. This wasn't a craft. It had no structure, no sharp edges. It moved with a non-ballistic grace that defied every law of physics Ben had ever known. It flowed like a liquid, then stopped instantly, hanging motionless. It expanded, contracting like a living thing, its colors shifting in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It was the most beautiful thing Ben had ever seen, and the raw, alien wrongness of it filled him with a terror so pure that it bypassed thought and went straight to his bones. "Leo," Chloe whispered, her voice tight with awe and fear. Are you getting this?" "Oh my God," Leo breathed, his hands hovering over his camera, as if afraid to touch it. The light phenomenon, this silent fire, began to descend. It moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, sinking from the heavens towards their small encampment. As it grew closer, it cast the surreal landscape in its alien glow. The gnarled Joshua trees became silhouettes against a shifting curtain of violet light. The granite boulders shimmered with an emerald sheen. Their shadows stretched and writhed, painted in colors that had no right to exist on Earth. Then the glitches started. The monitor on Chloe's lap fizzled and died. The 3 main cameras, their red lights blinking, suddenly went dark. Marcus jolted awake as his audio equipment let out a single sharp hiss and then went dead. "Power's out, all of it," Chloe cried, her voice trembling. "Backup batteries are dead. How is that possible?" But one camera, an older, battery-powered DSLR that Leo had brought as a personal B-cam, was still running. Its small red light was a defiant beacon in the encroaching weirdness. The silent fire hovered now, perhaps 200 feet above them, vast and utterly silent. It was no longer just beautiful, it was intelligent. He could feel it. It was a feeling that bypassed his ears and his eyes, a direct pressure on his consciousness. It felt ancient, vast, and possessed of an intelligence so far beyond human comprehension that it registered as a form of dread. And it was indifferent. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't friendly. It was like a whale gliding past the plankton, aware of it, but on a scale of existence so different that communication was a meaningless concept. Then the hum began. It wasn't a sound. Nothing vibrated the air to be picked up by an eardrum. It was a vibration inside of him. It resonated in the marrow of his bones, in the fluid of his inner ear, in the very structure of his skull. It was a low, powerful thrum that seemed to align with the pulsing of the lights above. It felt like a deep, internal examination, a scan that was reading his DNA, his thoughts, his memories. He felt utterly, terrifyingly transparent. He looked at the others. They were frozen. Their faces, masks of slack-jawed terror and wonder, bathed in the shifting, psychedelic glow. Chloe's mouth was open, but no sound came out. Leo was a statue behind his one working camera. The world had stopped. The encounter lasted for 3 minutes that stretched into a subjective eternity. The light pulsed in a final brilliant wave of deep indigo that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air. He felt the hum in his skull peak, a crescendo of silent sound that made his vision swim. And then, as silently and as impossibly as it had arrived, it flowed back up. It didn't fly, it retracted, pouring back into the point in the sky from which it had been born, shrinking until it was a single, multicolored star. Then it winked out of existence. Absolute silence and darkness rushed back in, so total and abrupt that it was physically painful. The only light was from the stars, which now seemed faint and inadequate. A moment later, the equipment came back to life. The main camera's red lights flickered on. Chloe's monitor booted up with a cheerful chime that sounded like a scream in the stillness. No one spoke. The air was thick with the aftershock of a shattered worldview. They stood in the dark, 4 small humans in a vast desert, their logical, predictable world torn open by a silent, beautiful, and terrifying fire from the sky. Ben felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, a lingering echo of the hum in his bones, a psychic residue he knew with dreadful certainty he would not be able to simply explain away. The stunned silence in the Watcher's Bowl held for a long time, broken only by the shivering whisper of the wind. It was Leo who finally moved, his hands trembling as he fumbled with his B-cam. Did I get it?" he stammered, his voice cracking. He didn't dare look at the playback screen. He looked at Chloe, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a filmmaker's dawning, electric thrill. Chloe, galvanized into action, scrambled over to him. "Don't move it. Don't touch anything. Just let me see." She leaned over, her breath fogging in the cold air. The small LCD screen glowed, and there it was. Crystal clear, undeniable. The silent, impossible coalescence of light. The slow, graceful descent. The alien colors washing over the desert floor. The entire event, captured in pristine, high-definition footage. "Oh my God," Chloe breathed, a hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. It was a reaction Ben couldn't decipher. Was it fear or was it triumph? "We have it! We have it all!" Ben felt detached, as if he were watching a scene from a movie. His mind, his fortress of logic and reason, was a ruin. The foundations were gone, the walls breached. He couldn't process what he had seen. His brain kept trying to slot it into a known category: aurora, plasma, military tech. But the silent, intelligent grace of its movement refused every classification. He felt a deep, seismic shudder in the core of his identity. He was the man who explained things, and he had just witnessed the inexplicable. The pressure behind his eyes was a dull, persistent throb. The pack-out was a clumsy, hurried affair. No one spoke. The usual post-shoot banter was replaced by a heavy, frightened reverence. They were smuggling a miracle, or a nightmare, out of the desert. The drive back to the park entrance was when it started for Ben. The first slip. He was driving, his eyes on the familiar dirt road illuminated by the truck's headlights. He glanced down at the dashboard clock, 3:17 a.m. He looked up at the road, navigating a tight curve around a cluster of yucca plants. The maneuver felt like it took a single fluid second. He glanced back at the clock. 3:21 a.m. 4 minutes had vanished. He hadn't zoned out. He hadn't been lost in thought. There was just a gap, a clean, seamless excision of time. His heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Simultaneously, A faint echo of the hum resonated deep in his skull, a ghostly vibration that made his teeth ache. "You okay, Ben?" Chloe asked from the passenger seat. She was staring at her phone, which had gained service. "You look pale." "Fine," he lied, his voice tight. "Long night." He blamed it on shock, adrenaline, lack of sleep. His mind scrambled for a rational foothold, a plausible explanation to stop the vertigo that was threatening to overwhelm him. Back at the cheap motel they were using as a base of operations, the atmosphere was electric. They crowded into Chloe's room, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and momentous discovery. Leo hooked the B-cam's memory card to a laptop. The footage was even more stunning on the larger screen. It was breathtakingly beautiful and deeply unnerving. The way the light moved defied any special effect they had ever seen. Its silent, fluid perfection was its most terrifying quality. Chloe was ecstatic. She kept saying, "This is it. This isn't just a documentary anymore. This is everything. This changes everything." Ben couldn't share her elation. Watching the footage made him feel sick. The throb behind his eyes intensified into a splitting headache. The silent, pulsing rhythm of the light on the screen seemed to sync with his own heartbeat, creating a disorienting, hypnotic effect. He felt a wave of vertigo so intense he had to sit down. "Loop the descent," Chloe ordered, her voice sharp with focus. "Let's see again." As Leo looped a 10-second clip of the light expanding and contracting, Ben felt the hum return, stronger this time, a phantom limb of a sensation. He felt a profound, cosmic loneliness wash over him, a terrifying echo of the feeling he'd had in the bowl, the sense of being an insignificant microbe under an impossibly vast microscope. "Wait, stop, go back," Marcus, the sound guy, said suddenly, and leaning close to the screen. "Right there. Go frame by frame." Leo complied, clicking through the footage one frame at a time. In the bright, swirling core of the silent fire, for a single, fleeting frame, the light resolved itself. It wasn't just a chaotic swirl of color. For 1/24th of a second, it formed a pattern, a complex geometric symbol, like a cross between a snowflake and a circuit board, glowed with sharp mathematical precision, before dissolving back into fluid light. "Whoa," Leo whispered. "What is that?" "Go forward," Chloe commanded. They scanned the rest of the clip. They found more. Dozens of them. Each one visible for only a single frame, a hidden language embedded in the light. They weren't random. They were intricate, deliberate, and utterly alien. Watching them flash on the screen, Ben felt a new sensation. It was as if the symbols were trying to connect with something inside his head. The pressure behind his eyes flared, and for a terrifying instant, his vision superimposed an image of the dark, star-filled desert over the cheap motel room. He blinked, and it was gone. He stood up abruptly, a cold sweat on his brow. "I can't watch this anymore. I need some air." He stumbled out of the room, leaving Chloe and her crew huddled around the laptop, their faces illuminated by the glow of the captured phenomenon. They were scientists discovering a new world, but Ben felt like a test subject, contaminated by the experiment. The encounter hadn't just been witnessed, it had been felt. And watching the footage wasn't just reviewing data, it was re-exposing himself to the source. The light hadn't just shone on him, it had left something behind. An imprint, not burned on his skin, but directly onto his consciousness. The days that followed were a slow, grinding dissolution of the world Ben Carter knew. The desert, once his sanctuary of logic and order, now felt like the source of a creeping mental infection. The temporal distortions, which he had initially dismissed as a product of shock, began to worsen with terrifying frequency. He was no longer just losing minutes, he was reliving moments. He was at his desk in the ranger station, filling out a mundane incident report. He reached for his coffee cup, his fingers brushing against the ceramic. The cup tipped, toppling over the edge of the desk. He watched it fall in slow motion, a dark arc of coffee splashing against the linoleum floor. He felt a flash of annoyance. Then, he was sitting back at his desk, his hand outstretched, just about to touch the cup. He froze, his entire body rigid with a paralyzing sense of déjà vu. He knew, with absolute, chilling certainty, what was about to happen. He tried to pull his hand back, to fight the script, but his muscles wouldn't obey. His fingers brushed the ceramic, the cup tipped, it fell, the exact same arc, the exact same splash. A personal time loop, lasting only a few seconds, but it left him gasping for air, his heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. The world felt like a recording, and someone was clicking the replay button on his life. These echoes in time began to bleed into his senses. While staring at a brightly lit computer screen in his office, he would suddenly see the Watcher's Bowl at night, the gnarled silhouettes of the Joshua trees stark against the sky filled with impossible swirling colors. The visions were fleeting, lasting only a second, but they were vivid, immersive, and profoundly disorienting. He was in two places at once, his consciousness flickering between the solid reality of his office and the memory of that night. The hum returned at random, insidious intervals. It would rise from the base of his skull without warning, a silent, bone-deep thrum that made the world feel thin and unreal. It was always accompanied by a crushing wave of cosmic loneliness, an emotional state so vast and alien it had no human parallel. It was the feeling of being a single, forgotten thought in an infinite, unthinking mind. It was the psychic sunburn from the silent fire's gaze, and it was beginning to blister. His relationship with Chloe fractured completely. She had returned to Los Angeles, taking the footage, the source of his torment, with her. She called him daily, her voice a frantic buzz of excitement and conspiracy. "Ben, we're having it analyzed by a spectral imaging specialist," she'd say, her words tumbling over each other. "He says the colors, they don't correspond to any known light-emitting element. They're off the known spectrum, and the symbols, the geometry is non-Euclidean. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand that I'm not sleeping," Ben snapped back during one call, his patience worn to a raw nerve. "I understand that I'm seeing things. I feel like my head is being split open, Chloe. Whatever that thing was, it did something to me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's probably just PTSD, Ben," she said, her voice softening, but it was the placating tone one uses on a child. "You went through a traumatic event. It's understandable, but you have to see the bigger picture. This is the most important discovery in human history. We can't let personal issues get in the way of that." He hung up on her. She was obsessed. She saw the footage as a key to fame, to history, to a Nobel Prize. She was unaffected, a clean observer. But Ben felt like the specimen pinned to the board. The rift between them was no longer just a disagreement. It was a chasm separating the witness from the victim. He was living the horror she was preparing to sell to the world. One afternoon, he was driving his patrol route, the sun beating down on the cracked earth. The hum started, low and insistent. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and when he opened them, the world was awash in pale, shifting greens and violets. The asphalt of the road shimmered, and the rocks on the side of the road seemed to flow and pulse with the rhythm of the hum. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust. He sat there, clutching the steering wheel, his knuckles bloodless as the alien colors slowly faded, leaving the familiar harsh glare of the desert sun. He was losing his grip. The experience hadn't just shattered his worldview, it was actively overriding his perception of reality. The imprint wasn't a memory. It was a live feed, a parasitic connection that was slowly, inexorably pulling his mind apart. In his desperation, his thoughts turned away from science and reason, which had failed him so completely, and toward the only other source of information he had, the rambling, dismissed folklore of a desert eccentric. Coyote Jim had called them spirit lights. He had mentioned old-timers. Ben remembered the local legends, the whispers of a recluse who lived deep in the desert, a man who supposedly understood the lights, a crazy old hermit. A week ago, he would have scoffed at the idea. Now it felt like his only hope. He had to find him. He had to find someone who could tell him what was happening inside his own head. Finding the hermit was a journey into the heart of local myth. The name Silas was spoken in whispers at the local diner, accompanied by vague gestures toward the rugged, trackless wilderness south of the park. He was a ghost story, a cautionary tale. Ben had to follow a breadcrumb trail of half-remembered directions and skeptical warnings. "He doesn't take kindly to visitors," one old shopkeeper told him, his eyes narrowed. "He went out there to be left alone." After 2 days of searching, Ben found it. Tucked away in a small, hidden canyon, miles from the nearest paved road, was a shack. It was a ramshackle construction of salvaged wood, corrugated tin, and desert ingenuity. The area around it was an unnerving collage of science and mysticism. A large homemade Dobsonian telescope, its mirror clearly hand-ground, pointed at the sky. Strange, intricate antennae made of copper wire were arrayed on the roof. And leaning against the wall were charts covered in complex astronomical calculations mixed with symbols that looked unsettlingly like the geometric patterns from the silent fire. Ben approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel. The door creaked open before he could knock. An old man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim interior. He was thin and wiry, with a wild mane of white hair and a beard that reached his chest. His eyes, however, were not the eyes of a madman. They were sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of surprise. "I wondered when you'd show up," the man said, his voice a dry rustle. "The ranger. I felt the echo when it looked at you." Ben was stunned into silence. This was Silas. How did you know?" Ben finally managed. "I've been studying them for 40 years, Silas said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come in. You smell of ozone and temporal displacement. It's a familiar scent." The inside of the shack was even more bewildering. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, crammed with texts on astrophysics, quantum mechanics, and theoretical physics, sitting alongside esoteric volumes on sacred geometry and pre-Babylonian cosmology. A bank of humming, outdated electronic equipment blinked with faint green lights. The entire space smelled of old paper, dust, and the sharp electric tang Ben now associated with the light. "You're not what I expected," Ben said, looking at a complex star chart on the table. "People expect a lunatic. I was a doctor of astrophysics at Caltech. I was part of a team analyzing deep space radio signals, SETI. We found something. Not a message, not a 'we come in peace.' We found a signal that was not random. It was complex, ordered, but it wasn't a language. It was biological noise, the background radiation of a living, thinking universe. I traced its focal point. It wasn't coming from a star or a galaxy. It was strongest right here, this patch of desert." He handed a glass to Ben, his eyes intense. "So, I came here. I left everything. I had to see the source." Ben finally found his voice. "The lights. What are they? A ship? An alien? Silas let out a dry, humorless laugh. A ship? An alien? You're still thinking in such small, human terms. You think it traveled here? It's always been here. And it's not here. Not in our 3 dimensions. He tapped his temple. Joshua Tree is what the old mystics would call a thin place. The veil between dimensions, between realities, is weaker here. What you saw, what you filmed, wasn't a thing visiting us. It was a projection, a sensory organ of a vast, higher dimensional entity dipping into our reality to perceive it. Imagine a being living in a 3-dimensional world dipping its finger into a 2-dimensional world. To the flat creatures living on that plane, what would they see? A circle. A circle that appears from nowhere, changes size, and then vanishes. They could never comprehend the finger, let alone the hand or the body it's attached to. The analogy struck Ben with the force of a physical blow. The expanding, contracting light, the appearance from nothing. That's the silent fire. And that is the true danger. It doesn't just show itself, it observes, it perceives. And its perception is an active, physical force. When it focused on you, on your little group, it did more than just see you. It imprinted on you. He leaned forward, his gaze locking with Ben's. It created a psychic, perhaps even a quantum entanglement, a thread. Your consciousness, your simple, linear human consciousness, is now loosely tethered to a being that perceives all time as a single, simultaneous moment. The temporal slips, the echoes, the hum, those are the side effects. Your brain is struggling to process sensory input from a nonlinear, incomprehensible reality. It's like a dial-up modem trying to download the entire internet at once. It's burning you out. A cold dread, far deeper and more intellectual than simple fear, settled in Ben's stomach. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't malevolent. It was an accident of proximity. He was a bug that flew too close to a cosmic bonfire, and now the very structure of his sanity was catching fire. "Can you fix it?" Ben asked, the question sounding naive and childish even to his own ears. Can the connection be broken? Silas looked away toward the strange charts on his wall. His expression was grim. You can't break an entanglement, Ranger. You can't unsee what you've seen. The light found you, and it's not done looking. Silas's words were a death sentence delivered with the cold precision of a physicist. There was no cure. There was only management, and Ben's condition was deteriorating far faster than he could manage. The psychic bleed from the higher dimension was becoming a torrent. The time loops grew longer, more complex. He would find himself reliving entire conversations, trapped in a 5-minute feedback loop, aware of his imprisonment, but powerless to stop it. He'd stand in the kitchen, arguing with the phantom Chloe on the phone, only to find himself moments later, with the phone in his hand, about to dial her number, the bitter words of the argument he hadn't had yet already souring in his mouth. These episodes left him nauseous and disoriented, his memory becoming a tangled mess of what had happened, what would happen, and what was happening now. The auditory hallucinations evolved. The simple, bone-deep hum began to fracture into complex, layered harmonies. Sometimes it was a terrifyingly beautiful music, a celestial choir of layered tones that seemed to describe the birth and death of stars, a symphony of the cosmos he called Star Song. It was sublime and agonizing, a glimpse of divine knowledge that felt like it was tearing his synapses apart. At other times, the hum sharpened into whispers. They weren't words in any human language, but they had the cadence of information. They sounded like mathematical equations being recited, like strings of raw data, like the universe explaining its own source code directly into his brain. His sense of self, the core I that was Ben Carter, began to feel terrifyingly thin. It was diluting, like a drop of ink in an ocean. He'd look in the mirror and struggle to connect with the face staring back. He felt less like a person and more like a sensor, a tiny data point in a vast, incomprehensible pattern. The entity wasn't just observing him, it was beginning to observe through him. He started seeing the lights when he was awake, a faint, shimmering aurora in his peripheral vision while he was buying groceries, a flash of impossible violet light reflecting in a puddle. The silent fire was no longer a memory from a single night. It was a constant hovering presence at the edge of his perception. It felt like the entity, having tagged him, was now actively trying to strengthen the connection, to calibrate the signal, to get a better view through its new accidental lens. His humanity was the static it was trying to tune out. He drove back to Silas's shack, his truck weaving slightly on the road. He looked haunted, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, his face pale and drawn. He found the old astrophysicist sitting outside, polishing the lens of his telescope. Silas looked up, his expression one of deep pity. "It's getting stronger, isn't it, the signal?" "I'm falling apart," Ben said, his voice ragged. He explained the star song, the whispers, the feeling of his identity dissolving. It wants to connect. I can feel it pulling." Silas nodded slowly, his gaze distant, fixed on the horizon. "I've seen this before. A few others over the decades. Wanderers, prospectors. They got too close. Most went mad, walked out into the sun talking about the colors." He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "The entity isn't malicious. It's curious, like a child with a magnifying glass. It doesn't understand that the ant is burning." "What do I do?" Ben pleaded. "There has to be something." "I told you, the connection can't be broken," Silas said firmly. "But perhaps it can be dampened. The signal can be made less clear." He stood up and walked over to Ben, looking him directly in the eye. "Listen to me, Ranger. This is the most important thing you will ever hear. What is the nature of the entity? It is vast, complex, and intelligent. What does it find interesting? Focus, data, complex thoughts. Your mind, your analytical, scientific, problem-solving mind is like a bright, shining beacon to it. Every time you try to understand it, every time you try to fight it, every time you focus on it, you are strengthening the connection. You are tuning your own receiver to its frequency." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "To survive," Silas continued, "you must do the opposite of everything your instinct tells you to do. You must not try to understand. You must not fight. You must embrace simplicity, silence, emptiness. You have to detune your own consciousness. Make yourself a boring signal, a rock, a grain of sand. You must stop being a lighthouse and become part of the coastline." The advice was a paradox, a con wrapped in cosmic horror. To save his mind, he had to stop using it. To preserve his self, he had to let go of the analytical drive that had defined his entire life. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked him to do. The catalyst for the final storm was an email notification. Chloe, deaf to his increasingly frantic and disjointed warnings, had done it. A subject line flashed on his phone screen. "Exclusive sneak peek, the Joshua Tree Lights, Cosmic Chronicles." She had leaked a 30-second clip of the footage to a major paranormal news blog. The moment the video went viral, the effect on Ben was catastrophic. He was standing in his small living room when it hit. It wasn't a gradual increase in the hum or a fleeting vision. It was a psychic dam breaking. Suddenly, thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of minds were focusing on the phenomenon, on the light, on the symbols. Each curious click, each viewer's awe and speculation acted as an amplifier, a focusing lens for the entity's attention. And all that amplified energy surged down the one living, established connection it had, the imprint inside Ben's skull. The connection flared from a thread to a fire hose. His reality didn't just fracture, it dissolved. The walls of his house became transparent, showing him not the desert outside, but a terrifying, beautiful flood of the silent fire's perception. He was seeing multiple timelines at once, a vision of his house as it would be in a decade, crumbling and abandoned, superimposed over its current state. He saw the Watcher's Bowl not just on that one night, but across millennia, the rocks eroding in fast motion, the stars wheeling overhead at impossible speeds. The star song became a deafening roar. The whispers of mathematical equations became a torrent of raw, incomprehensible data flooding his consciousness. He felt the vast, cold, unutterable emptiness of deep space, the birth pangs of a distant nebula, the slow, patient gravity of a black hole. His human thoughts, his memories of his mother's face or the taste of coffee, were being washed away, overwritten by a tidal wave of cosmic awareness. He was on the verge of being completely and irrevocably erased. In the heart of that psychic storm, drowning in the perceptions of a god, one clear thought, one final piece of his own dying consciousness surfaced. Silas's advice: become a rock. He had one last choice. He could let go, let the storm consume him, his mind and memories archived and assimilated by the cosmic being, another interesting specimen, or he could fight for his humanity, not with strength, but with stillness. With the last dregs of his own will, he stumbled to his truck. He didn't know how he managed to get the keys in the ignition, how his feet found the pedals. The world outside the windshield was a swirling vortex of alien color and superimposed timelines. He wasn't driving through the desert, he was driving through the raw fabric of space-time. He drove away from the town, away from the cell towers and power lines, away from anything that hummed with human complexity. He drove deep into the park, onto a dirt track his body remembered, even if his mind couldn't quite focus, until the truck could go no further. He stumbled out into the searing heat of the afternoon sun. The psychic storm raged. He collapsed to his knees among the ancient, silent rocks and gnarled creosote. This was it, the final battle. And he didn't fight. Guided by Silas's desperate wisdom, he surrendered. He closed his eyes against the overwhelming visual chaos. He stopped trying to make sense of the data flooding his mind. He stopped trying to hold on to his memories. He let them go. He focused on the simple, the tangible, the animal. He felt the sharp grit of the sand under his palms. This is real. He felt the intense, baking heat of the sun on the back of his neck. This is real. He felt the hot, dry wind on his chapped lips. This is real. He focused on the slow, ragged rhythm of his own breathing. In, out. A simple biological machine. This is real. He deliberately, forcefully emptied his mind. He let the star song wash over him without trying to hear its melody. He let the data whispers flow through him without trying to grasp their meaning. He made his consciousness a smooth, uninteresting stone in a river of cosmic information. He offered the entity nothing. No analysis, no fear, no wonder, no complexity. He offered it only the simple, silent, unthinking presence of a man in the desert, a creature of earth and bone, as simple as the rocks around him. He was detuning the receiver. He was becoming, in a word, uninteresting. For a long, terrifying time, the storm continued to rage, threatening to tear his simple focus apart. But slowly, painstakingly, the flood began to recede. The overwhelming pressure lessened. The entity's intense, focused gaze, finding nothing of interest to hold it, began to drift. The child with the magnifying glass was growing bored with the unmoving ant. The psychic storm did not end with a thunderclap, but faded like the dying light of a sunset. The overwhelming flood of perception receded, leaving behind not silence, but a quiet, manageable hum. It was a low, constant thrum in his bones, the new baseline of his existence. The connection wasn't broken, but the volume had been turned down. Ben lay on the desert floor for hours, weak and hollowed out, but blessedly, recognizably himself. He had survived. He had faced down an entity of incomprehensible scale, not by fighting it, but by making himself small enough to be ignored. He had found a way to coexist with the imprint. The aftermath in the wider world was loud and chaotic. Chloe's documentary footage became a global sensation. It was endlessly debated by scientists, dissected by conspiracy theorists, and revered by New Age mystics. It was hailed as undeniable proof of extraterrestrial life, a hoax of unprecedented skill, a new form of natural plasma. It changed the conversation, but it provided no real answers. Chloe became a star, a talking head on every news network, but she could never replicate the event. She led expeditions back to the Watcher's Bowl with teams of scientists and state-of-the-art equipment. They found nothing. The light, having made its observation, had moved on or grown silent. It was a one-time performance. Ben was never part of that conversation. He quit his job as a park ranger the day he returned from the desert. The world of data, reports, and public interaction was no longer a place he could safely inhabit. The complexity of it was a danger, a temptation for the silent watcher he now carried within him. He took on a new life. He didn't wander into the sun like the men Silas had described. He took the hermit's lesson to heart. He bought a small, isolated plot of land bordering the park, not far from Silas's own canyon. He lived in a simple cabin with no internet and a weak cell signal. He worked with his hands, repairing fences for local ranchers, maintaining the desert land, finding solace in simple, physical tasks. He spoke little, but listened intently to the wind. The final scene unfolds years later. Ben Carter is older. His face is weathered by the sun and wind, etched with lines of a life lived outdoors. He sits in a simple wooden chair outside his cabin as twilight bleeds across the desert sky, painting the mountains in shades of purple and orange. He is at peace. He looks up at the vast, starry expanse, a canvas he knows better than any other. He feels the faint, familiar hum in his bones. It is not a source of terror anymore, but a companion, a constant reminder of the immensity that surrounds his small, quiet life. His eyes now, attuned to the subtlest shifts in the night sky, catch something. Far out, in the deep field of stars beyond Orion, there was a flicker, a silent, impossible bloom of pale green and soft violet, there for a heartbeat, then gone. He doesn't feel fear. He doesn't feel wonder. He feels no need to understand it, to chase it, or name it. He simply acknowledges the vast, indifferent presence, a quiet recognition passing between the man who once looked too close and the silent fire between the stars. He closes his eyes, turns his attention away from the sky, and focuses on the solid, grounding feeling of the earth beneath his feet. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more AI stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.